All right. So if there are, well, of course, having more responsibilities will affect the workload, but will it affect it unreasonably? And what can the offsite groups do to prevent it reaching unreasonable levels if it does risk that?
I mean, first, the problem is defining unreasonable. I mean, I do think it would be unreasonable to expect them to have a rapid turnaround rate. I mean, we don't have a rapid turnaround rate. Again, the Brin investigation took a couple months, I think. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline there, but
I think it was 4 months nearly.
okay, so yeah, so it took a while, and that's with. I mean, obviously moderators and admins are volunteers and they put in the time that they have. So anybody expecting an investigation like that to take 2 weeks, that would be unreasonable. But that doesn't mean that the amount of effort into the investigation overall is unreasonable. And if you had a smaller administration team, maybe it would have taken 6 months instead of 4. But again, that doesn't make it unreasonable. It just means you have to pace it out. So that's one issue with moderation's claim of how much more work it would generate. Okay, fine, do it slowly, do it over time, but do the work.
Yeah, I agree completely. And it's just like we said before, it's just this like unwillingness to like take that first step and be like, okay, we recognize that something isn't firing on all cylinders here. Like there's some kind of disconnect. Let's do this small thing and see how it goes. And even if we had gotten that out of the petition, I think most of us would be, maybe not happy, but we would be satisfied for the moment in terms of like, okay, they recognize, that there's a problem, and maybe we don't agree on how to fix it yet, but they recognize it. And I think, just like we said, it's that willful ignorance of there's no problem, like see no evil, hear no evil, taste no evil, there is no evil, and it's very problematic.
Definitely.
Yeah, it is. And there's no reason. At a minimum, I thought from the start, like, it might take a bit of thinking, but you can come up with a system, given that what we're talking about is situations where there's already a body of evidence. You can come up with systems where you can discuss, if you're worried about verifiability, you can have a standard for, like, these are the things that we need. And you can tell people, like, these are the things that we need. And it's very quick to just kind of pass the initial submissions and say, no, this hasn't got X, so it's not good enough. It's not that much work. Yes, there's going to be the instances where there is enough of a case that they need to actually do more research and spend time on it are going to be fairly small, even across the whole of nation states. Like the ones where, like instances like the Brun investigation, where you have a solid amount of evidence, are going to be the exception, not the rule, even if you have a problem with people making spurious submissions. Again, it's just like that unwillingness to even think about how can we set up a system where if you tick these boxes, we will do something, is what's so disappointing about it all.
Yeah, there was a good question in the chat. I'm trying to find it really quick in terms of how small and mid-sized regions, are supposed to combat this issue. I think, we're the benefits, all of us in this convo, adminning a larger sized region. And so we kind of have more connections and are able to kind of, investigate, easier, and we kind of trust each other. We have relationships, it's like the North Pacific bans someone and they present this evidence, like, we trust that that's accurate. So I don't know, are there any like ideas about, how, besides what we've already talked about, really helping out, smaller and, middle-sized regions?
I think more general awareness is a good idea. So just, making sure that people are aware this sort of thing happens, but also spreading the word about who's a safe person to talk to. So, for example, someone approaching, I don't really have any good examples because I don't really talk to people who don't take this stuff seriously. But like, if somebody has experienced sexual harassment, they can come and talk to me, and I can talk them through how to deal with it, or if they've had a report of sexual harassment. And any of us who take this seriously would be good options. Whereas, if they go and talk to someone who thinks that it's not a real problem, they're going to get told that's just not a thing. And so spreading the word about, who they can talk to for help, I think would also be a good thing. And I mean, certainly it would. I mean, it's not going to be reasonable to expect NS moderation to ban someone when the region that they're in hasn't done so. So, like, you know, if like it would never be a reasonable case for us for like the North Pacific to go to NS moderation and say, hey, so and so has done a thing. Can you deal with them so we don't have to? Like, no, that's not okay. Obviously,
Right.
But that may mean that smaller or medium sized region need some support in terms of how to handle it on their side in order for it to be able to be taken more officially.
Yeah, and I know from at least from my perspective, and I imagine this holds for kind of all of the moderators or all the admins that have been involved in these kind of things. If a small legion came to me and said, we've got this issue, we don't know how to deal with it. You've investigated these things before. Can you help us? I would straight away say, yes. It's like, to the extent I have time to do that, it's like I may be really busy at that moment and not be able to. But if I had time, I'm not going to just say, oh no, that's not my region. It's nothing to do with me. And if there's enough of us that have that skill set, which I think there are, it's like, and I saw someone mention like the trust issue. It's like, okay, so one region might not trust Europea to help them out with an investigation, but they might trust the North Pacific, or they might trust South Pacific, or they might trust 10,000 Islands, or whatever region they trust. If we're willing to put that time in, which I think we are, then that help is always available, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, other people correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I would quite happily kind of go to another region and help them investigate this, which would require trust, because the only way you could do it would be for them to appoint temporary admins to their region and give us access to things. But I would be, in the small regions I've been in, I'd be totally I would have been willing to do that with certain regions that I was allied with. And as a big region, I'd be willing to do it the other way as well.
Yeah, I think one thing too that we can help encourage, which is something I alluded to in one of my posts, but it wasn't completely understood, is really encouraging the development of administrative teams completely separate from the government. Because I think one big thing that is problematic that can happen to survivors is, you tell someone, this disclosure, and, you're told is, okay, like press charges like in the court. And, it's like, that's a very insufficient, it's not an appropriate response. And I say this as someone who, I started playing this game very young, and that's what I would have told someone when I started, as a founder of a region. Because I just didn't, as a 13-year-old kid, I didn't get it. So I really think, it's not to shame anyone, if anyone's listening and has done something like that, but it's just that awareness of, some of these issues are in game and some of them aren't. If someone's spying on your region, take them to court. But if, there's acts of, series of harassment that are impacting people's real lives, that's not a matter for any, role play court or judicial system. Yeah. And I think
gameplay courts are not equipped to deal with this sort of issue. Most of them don't have laws on the books about it. They don't have the capacity to adequately handle complaints, or be mindful of victims' privacy. I mean, like TNP's court, you can't make an anonymous complaint like that. The evidence is going to be submitted publicly and your witnesses testify publicly. That's not going to work for a sexual harassment complaint. Like that's why they have to be handled by the administrative team separately.
Yeah, and I just think there's a lot of awareness to be had there.
Yeah, definitely. We can do a lot just by increasing that level of information about how to handle these cases, how to report these cases, how to avoid these kind of situations. If there's that fine line between it's not the victim's fault, but if we can promote. So you never want to blame the victim for it, but at the same time, if we can make information available, these are red flags, look out for these things. And you can empower somebody to spot them in advance and say, okay, I'm not going to do that. That is the best place to cut it off, actually. Because you cut it off before it happens rather than dealing with it after.
I do want to say it's not all of this is doom and gloom. Back when, even a few years ago, but even like many years ago, but this is a relatively recent change. I'm sorry, I'm babbling. It used to be that most NS forums, offsite forums, would not address issues that didn't occur on their own forums, exactly the way that NS moderation is currently refusing to address anything that happens on an offsite forum. And if you harass someone somewhere else, if you committed a crime somewhere else, whatever it was, well, we can't verify the evidence. We can't deal with this. It wasn't on our site. It's not our problem. I do think it's a very positive change that many, many regions have moved away from this. TNP has, Europeia has, I think all the GCRs have, as far as I know, where, if somebody does something like this and it's a serious offense, with real life implications, no, we're willing to act when it wasn't in our region and it wasn't against members of our region, because this is a big deal. So, we have made progress.
Yes, applause.
I will say, before we go into question time, I mentioned that, okay, this isn't over. So I'm going to give NS moderation a little bit of time to respond again. But if they indicate that was it and this was their response, my next step is to escalate to NS administration. So emailing the admin team directly with a link with the petition and then the response and why it was insufficient, and see if we can get an official response, because this one was posted by Nervin. A response maybe by Violet, to make sure the admins themselves have weighed in. And if that's insufficient, I will then escalate to Max if necessary, because this isn't going to work. In the meantime, any of you who are responsible for buying stamps for your region, I would like to encourage you to not do that. I think while this is their response, they don't deserve any of our money.
Dead silence.
Dead steely silence.
I think that's a good suggestion, definitely. It's why would we want to be? It feels, from a player perspective, or from an player admin perspective, it feels like we're paying money for to the game to help the game operate, and we're not getting what we need back from them. And so
exactly.
What are we paying for? Especially when I know there are people who would provide the kind of services that we want to see the game provide, would do it as volunteers. It's not even like they need money to hire people. There's plenty of people in the community who would jump on this, like the three of us on this radio. I'm quite sure if they asked us, will you help us investigate this? We'd say, yes, of course we will.
Yeah,
that actually reminds me of the other issue with the whole we don't have enough staff. Okay, any of us would be totally happy to help out with this sort of investigation that we're asking for, but we can't offer ourselves. If we offer ourselves, we immediately disqualify ourselves from ever being included, because anybody who wants to be a mod can't be trusted to be that. Except that is so mind-bogglingly short-sighted.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It doesn't make any. I understand why that rule is put into place, in terms of hey, I'm a new member, I've been here for 3 weeks, make me the site administrator. I understand that's kind of off-putting, but at the same time, that's not the core issue right now. I do want to address really quick, the stamps thing that you did bring up, and I think, that's going to be a part of contention that each region will have to consider on their own, because I think that's probably a matter for, the role-play governments. And not, the administrative teams. But
well, maybe. A lot of places handle things differently. I know TNP's regional government has no particular policy on stamps. If we buy any, it's simply in order to improve our communications. And that's going to be an individual decision. And some regions really rely a lot more on stamps to operate. And I don't want anybody to hurt themselves, for this. But I do think this is the main way that the site gets money, and I think that this is a reasonable way to go on strike, as it were.
I will say, though,
GCR difference that as a GCR, it's you don't have the same pressure that the UCRs have. That stamps are the primary route by which we get members, and I've got a lot of the data on that from our side, because we do manual recruiting, we do stamp recruiting, we do API recruiting, and stamps are the main driver. Of the three, they're the most effective.
The great era of manual recruitment, I guess, is over. Sadly, I was going to be manual recruitment, baby. I would spend 3 hours a night sending telegrams individually in nations, and look where I am now. I have the best freaking job in the world, and administrator to a region.
Now you have minions to send the telegrams for you.
But yeah, and I understand that, and I mean, again, I'm mostly just in TNP these days, so I'm not. It's not going to doing this wouldn't affect my region to a great degree. Everything that we do, we can do without stamps. So if that would hurt your region too much, don't do it. But if you can do it, and if you can make it up with other methods of, say, recruiting, API or whatever. And look, if you need help setting up anything with an API recruitment, I'm sure any of us would also be happy to help with that. But so, if you can cut off the stamps for a bit to show moderation that we're serious, I would do it. I would suggest it, but that's going to be an individual decision.
Unibot asked a question here.
Yes, I saw that.
Yes. All right.
I'll read it. Do you want to read it out, Gareth, or shall I do it?
If you want, you can.
Okay, so he said, the nation-states moderation team has given a demonstrably unsatisfying response, but they're claiming to be in discussions now about something. What do you think they're discussing now, if you care to speculate?
I'll speculate.
I think they're discussing banning all of us immediately. Who signed this petition?
When the site went down earlier today, I did have a brief thought. If they banned me for that petition.
Right? I had a moment of, are they just taking the whole thing down and just because they don't want to deal with us? To be more serious, I think given the context around that comment, I would speculate that they're discussing rephrasing the gag order. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think we're supposed to call it the defamation rule, but I can't.
Yeah, the gag order is a more accurate description because
exactly.
It applies to a lot more than defamation.
Yeah, and really doesn't apply to plenty of defamation. But yeah, so I would suspect that they're rewriting that partially because they seemed in their response they seem to have thought that the current policy was fine. The rule just needed to be rephrased, and that's definitely not true. But that seems to be the spot where they would do that. They could also be discussing finding more moderators, maybe. I mean, I don't know how much there is to discuss about that. There's just, find more moderators.
I think I got the sense it was really around how can the defamation rule be rephrased, but it really wasn't I didn't get the sense that there was much of a policy change going to happen there. It was more of a how can we make this clearer? Because I know people. Yeah. We're always arguing about exactly how that rule should be applied, and as I said earlier, I really don't think the current policy is consistent with the actual rule.
Well, and especially when I think you also pointed out that it would appear to prohibit submitting a GHR with offsite evidence for them to look into on-site stuff. So, they probably want to rewrite it for that.
Yeah, that would make sense if they want people to submit GHR requests with offsite evidence, as they said, then at least rewriting that part of the rule to take that prohibition out.
There's no reason it should apply to GHRs anyway. If somebody is harassing someone, or rather, if somebody is submitting so many GHRs that the moderation team is annoyed by them, that's not a defamation issue, regardless of the content. That's just somebody being a dick.
Yeah, and there's something we've discussed in Europe here as admins as well, is because we've had instances of this, is that there becomes a point where submitting bogus harassment complaints against someone becomes a form of harassment itself.
Right.
That's kind of another way they can get into this. It's like if they're worried about people submitting falsified reports, then have it set up and be as hard on falsified reports as you are on true reports. It's like I haven't got a problem with that.
But you don't have to punish that under defamation. You can punish that under general harassment or like spamming moderation.
Yeah.
And yes, GVH, I think Frack did.
Yeah, probably. I think so.
But to be fair, if you can name an offense, Frack probably did it. So.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any speculation in terms of what they might be discussing. Part of me kind of had this like ironical idea that maybe like they're literally going to take every all the main region admins up on their not so subtle requests join moderation and be kind of like a put us in an all or nothing position of well, you all subtly volunteered, here you go, and then you better take this and kind of manipulate it that way. But I don't really think that's what's going on.
No, because we're not active enough on the gameplay forum. Because that's the other part of it. They won't let anyone in who's not active enough. Not the gameplay, but the NS forum. when the whole reason I went over that. I won't rehash it.
Yeah, that triggered some interesting discussion in the chat, though. Talking about that, there was a lot of messages going forward in the chat. But yeah, I don't think that's what they're discussing. I agree. I think they're probably discussing rephrasing the defamation rule, because, I mean, as it is, it makes absolutely no sense. Nor does anything else, but that one particularly stands out as making
okay, so
much sense.
I just scrolled up to read the chat at that point. So to respond to Sankt, Sankt commented that he does think forum mods need to be active on the forum since they are supposed to be moderating the forum. I think that's fair. I think a number of us who aren't active on the forum would be willing to be active in order to help moderate it if we were to be forum mods. But there's nothing for us in terms of participation, and so we don't. That may have been a response to the supposed number of inactive mods. I'm not sure, but I mean, I think if especially if, say, a current moderator or administrator recommends someone, I think they really ought to consider that, even if that person isn't currently active, because the idea is your mods and admins know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and as we kind of have discussed at length as well, that not every person in a moderator quote capacity needs to do the same stuff. It's like what they're talking about here is something different to what forum moderators currently do, and it's a perfectly reasonable model to have a group of people who investigate complaints and a group of people who constantly watch the forum and look for people saying things they shouldn't be saying.
Exactly.
They don't have to be the same role.
I think that would itself do a lot to help the situation. Having a group of people whose title is actively acknowledged to be investigate sexual harassment. That would be huge.
And that would, I mean, I know, like, one of the kind of the underlying theme I got from a lot of the kind of responses by moderators was basically, this isn't something I want to be doing. I'm a moderator and I don't want to be dealing with this stuff. And it's like, okay, like, but maybe that would solve that problem. It's like, okay, you can be a forum moderator. That's what you want to do. These other people can do this, and you can do both as well if you want. You can have crossover between those groups, but they are different. They're different tasks. They involve different skills. I mean, you don't have to be able to track down IP addresses, correlate email addresses, do all the stuff that we do. You don't have to do that to be a forum moderator, and you don't really have to be able to kind of spend a lot of time online reading forum posts to see what's going on to do an investigation. Like, some people are good at one, some people are good at the other, some people are good at both.
Yeah, I guess Sankt's point is that it would involve giving access to a lot of tools, and I guess there's no reason to do that if you can't prove they're trustworthy on the forum. Although I'd argue that there are other ways to prove that someone's trustworthy, which
I agree.
would. I mean, it's a very, and maybe that's part of the problem we're having right now is it's like, all the moderators are coming up through this like one pipeline of involvement in the game. And so now you have a ton of moderators that, goes back to what we were talking about before, where like, it seems like none of these people have any idea like what gameplay is actually like. And maybe that's a part of it, is it's people who've really embraced the NS forum. And those are the people who keep moving up, in the ranks on the mod hierarchy. And, that's great. We need those people too. But, maybe we also need other perspectives, like people who have invested time moderating or adminning like a community in this region.
Yeah.
So
go ahead, finish.
No, I was just saying maybe there needs to be a different way of like verifying trust rather than just like watching someone in one place for a long period of time.
Yeah. To respond to the thing about tools, I mean, granted, I'm not an NS admin. In case anyone wasn't aware, I'm not an NS admin, so I don't have full knowledge of how everything works on the back end. But it does seem like there ought to be options to give people access to some things without giving them access to everything. So, for example, like an investigative moderator, whatever they would be called, maybe would have access to a specific subset of GHRs. That would be, if somebody submits a GHR and the category is harassment, for example, they have access to those. They don't have access to the other ones. They don't have access to, IPs or whatever else it is that admins on the site would get. But they have access to these things, and they can maybe whatever other tools they would need to investigate. That would be an alternative to being an admin and having full access to all of the site's tools. It may very well be that the site is not currently set up to allow that. I mean, NS is it's pretty basic in all of its quirky ways. I mean, it's very possible that they have 3 settings: admin, moderator, and none of the above.
Yep.
But that seems like an opportunity to make a new setting, and to add some additional options to let people help out.
I think even within the current system, one of the things that was said by, I can't remember which one, but one of the moderators commented in the threads about this, that kind of arguing why they couldn't just add more people was that, or why they couldn't rely on offsite evidence, was that he's saying that like all of the nation states mods can trust each other because everything is logged. So if one of them does something, the others can all see what they did.
Right, there's that as well.
So it seems to be that the trust argument is, I mean, yeah, I suppose somebody could go in, harvest all the IP addresses and publish them all and then disappear. So there's like, if somebody's really that untrustworthy, that's a problem. But in terms of like day-to-day stuff, like their position at the start was, we can trust each other because everything we do is verified. So if that's the case, then you can be a bit less strict about trust, like kind of adjudicating trust when you're hiring people, because there's not that much that people can do once they get in there anyway. It's like it's all traceable.
Mm-hmm. To respond to a couple of things that came up in chat, so yes, I agree. GHRs need to be redone. The category should mean something, but I'm also fine with it if just one category means something. For Sanctaria, I don't think that these people would need powers to ban or delete. I think they could do their investigation, and you may be right about they would need access to IP tools or something. I mean, again, I don't know all the tools. They would need access to some, but probably not all. If they decided that a ban or deletion was the right move, my thinking is they would report their findings to an admin who would then actually carry out the ban. They don't need all of the access that an admin would have to be able to just investigate and render a finding.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. That there's a lot of things that you could do to kind of allow people to do investigations and shield them from certain aspects of the site if that was the way you wanted to do it. If you really didn't think you can trust them.
Okay, mods then, thanks. My point is there's ways to separate out tasks, depending on what is appropriate for people to have, and depending on their trustworthiness.
Right.
I mean, if you wanted to I think this is an extreme example, but if you wanted to separate an investigator from actually having access to the IP addresses, you could set up a system where an IP investigation would come up is that the investigator would have an IP address for an account that had come up in an investigation, and they'd want to know if that matched the IP addresses that nation states had. So they could, it'd be inefficient, but if you were really worried about security, you could have a system where they said, I have this IP address for this person, does it match? And whichever the appropriate level of person to review that, whether it's a higher level moderator or an admin or whatever, can review that and just come back and say, yes, that's the right person, or no, that doesn't match. And then you've got an answer. And in theory, you could use that kind of tool.
All of this is the conversation we want to have with the moderators. Like, we want to throw out ideas and see if they'll work and see what has a chance and see what doesn't and come up with a solution. And we can't have that with them because their answer is no, that's too much work.
Yeah, and exactly. This is the kind of thing that can be worked out with discussion. There's things you can do. I mean, even just at a level, just to, if we can submit evidence to even without giving us an official role, if as forum admins we can submit a bunch of stuff to them and say, here's an IP address, this is how we got it, this is the person we think it corresponds to. They can then compare that. Like with the run case, for example, I've kind of mentioned this in a few places, that very little of the evidence we used in that investigation came from our forum. And I think all of the stuff that did, nation states would have equivalent evidence available to them, like on game side. So they could basically take the same path that we took using their own verified evidence from nationstates.net and reach the same conclusion, which is why that one particular really is a mystery to me.
Especially when they admitted it. Like, at the point where somebody admits their actions on site, I'm just baffled.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so that's the thing, is there are options here, but it's like what we've just been told is no. It's like, hey, we have all these ideas. What could work? Like, what can we do? How can we help? No. And that's not to say all of our ideas are perfect. I'm sure, administrators and moderators, maybe more appropriately, can, look at those and be like, okay, here's a problem, here's a problem, here's a problem, based on information you don't have. But maybe we working together, we're going to find a solution, or at least a step in the right direction. Yeah. Heavy stuff, guys.
Yeah, I was really surprised that we didn't at least get some movement on the defamation rule. I thought that was a very easy middle ground that could have been done.
Right.
I know there were proposals out there, for example, to let people report factually in full on things that have happened off-site just in one thread, just to have a single thread that's for announcements. And I cannot imagine any legal system in the world where it'd be defamation for me to post in a thread Europea has banned Brunhilde because the European admins have determined it is likely that he did this, and say whatever it is we determined. Because that is by definition not defamation.
And it doesn't matter whether what you determined is true or not. It matters that it is true that I'm saying that is what you determined. Yeah, and yes, that may generate some conversations that then become potentially defamation, but that's what moderators are for. It's like if in that thread somebody then says, I hate Brunhilde, he's a sexual predator, then that could be defamation, and that may be something that they want to step in and take out. But a discussion of the investigation and how we reached that conclusion and why we reached that conclusion, none of that is defamatory and would never be found defamatory. And again, at minimum, they ought to be required to act on a report, not preemptively start handing out warnings for saying something negative about another player.
Right. There needs to be a complaint.
And I do understand some of the legal concerns around the law that potentially even without. I think they ought to be a hell of a lot more concerned, and I said this in the thread as well, about the legal issues of being told that there's a predator on the site, being told that the predator is targeting victims using their site, and doing nothing about it, and then more people getting victimized. That to me is a much stronger legal concern for them. I agree. Yeah, but I don't know the details of Australian law. I'm much more familiar with US law and British law. But I can't believe that Australian law is that different, because they all come from the same source. They're all variations on Old English common law. Somebody just said the site runs under US jurisdiction, right? So my understanding is that it's under US jurisdiction because the servers are in the US. That was my understanding. It's not clear to me where I'm getting the Australian law thing from is that the terms of service of nation states, when you sign up that you agree to, include a clause saying you agree that this is under Australian law subject to the state of Victoria. Now, there's a question about whether that will be enforceable or not, but what they are attempting to do with their terms of service is to make it subject to Victoria State and Australia law. Anyway, so the point with the Gaudis is none of us are sure exactly what law would apply, and it would really depend on you can't know without a court deciding. I mean, Australia may very well think that they're the only ones whose laws apply. A US court may disagree and say that clause about it being governed by the laws of Australia is silly and irrelevant. But under all three, I think, Canada, the US, or Australia, I think it's reasonable to say that the bigger threat is going to be that moderation does nothing to act when explicitly warned of a predator on their site. Yeah. I mean, under US law, the defamation thing is a non-starter under US law. It's just it's never going to happen. So if they're under US jurisdiction, then their excuse is totally meaningless. I suspect from what moderators have said that they're working under the assumption they're under Australian law, because they keep making these veiled comments about how there are legal issues they can't talk about and things like that. Why exactly they can't just tell us what the legal advice they got is, which is what I'm reading between the lines, is that a lawyer somewhere told them this is what they have to do. Right. Yeah. Why they can't just present that to us is I can find a lawyer to tell them something else if that's the issue. Yeah. I mean, it may also be they are vaguely aware that there may be some legal issues with some element of something, but none of them are lawyers and don't want to speak authoritatively because they can't. And that is honestly an understandable position. I think in a lot of ways,
Actual lawyers can't comment because nation states is not their client and they are not an expert in whatever, whatever law actually applies. We don't know. But actual lawyers are going to be reluctant to comment officially on legalities.
Right.
And the rest of us are not lawyers. The rest of us are internet lawyers.
I mean, I am a lawyer, and I'm not going to tell nation states what the law is. I'm quite happy to talk about it in this environment because this is my opinion on what I think the law is. But I'm not going to go to them and say this is what I think you need to do.
Exactly.
Exactly. They're not my client. But
I'm a TNP lawyer. I can tell them what the TNP law would say.
There's enough of us who kind of know enough about this questioning, like whether there's any issues here, that there really should be more pushback on that. And I do notice GVH is talking about knowing legal academics and saying he's willing to get a paper written on it. So that would, or he or she, I don't know. That would actually be really useful if someone wants to do that. To get,
right? Like a legal paper on
just
law applies to nation states when and where. That'd be fantastic. Yeah. So KGB Radio, I'm not sure who that is. Was it VAC? Somebody said, I don't know. VAC, yeah. Anyway, said need to get Onder commenting. I want to point out, so I had a little bit of a squee kind of moment when I got a telegram from Onder saying that he wished to join. It was possibly the shortest message I've ever seen him write. It was one sentence.
Yes, it is VAC.
Cool. I remembered correctly.
Awesome. Well, this has been a good broadcast, guys. Almost 2 hours. I'm getting a little hungry, so it might be time to wrap it up.
Yeah.
All right. I guess last call for any additional questions if anyone wants to throw anything out.
Speak now or don't.
Speak now or don't. We may do this again in the future. I've been asked to do something on this for the World Fair, so I don't know if that's going to be audio or if I'll just type up a lecture or whatever, but
we should definitely keep this conversation going.
Yeah, for sure.
We can't drop the ball on this.
Yeah, guys, and thank you for everyone who tuned in. I don't know what the record number of listeners is on.
I think we're pushing it.
But I do think we are pushing it, and you guys, I mean, people have stuck around too, which is really cool. So thanks for being a part of this. Please get involved in this. In any way you see fit to do. Be it just talking to one of the three of us, or I know we talked briefly about the stamp strike. If that's something you're in the position to do, and would feel good about doing, definitely look into that. Just thank you for being a part of this discussion.
Definitely. So Souls, I forget what you stand for. I see EW and I want to say Evil Wolf. Sorry. So Souls was wanting to comment on the police, and we touched on this early on with moderations. Oh, just go to the police and report it there. And the bit about okay, even if we do that, and even if they get convicted, that's still not going to actually keep them off the damn site. But I mean, the police are not reliable in this case. They're not reliable when it comes to actual sexual assault in person. They're not reliable when it comes to rape. The court system is not friendly to victims. And police in general tend to dismiss complaints of online abuse, especially if the victim and the perpetrator live in different areas. Both sets of police will say it's not their jurisdiction, it's the other one's problem. They won't investigate. They'll usually just dismiss it as either not a real thing or not their issue. So that is definitely a big problem, and it's one of the issues with moderation's response is, oh, we'll go to the police. Okay, that is pointless.
That's, I think there's a broader issue that there's behaviours that we probably don't want to tolerate that may well not rise to the level of
there's
being
that
criminal.
Too.
And that
definitely,
I know that's certainly the case with a lot of the investigations we've done in Europe here. We had to really focus on this with one because we kept getting kind of pressure on well, have you gone to the police about this? And we just had to say,
it's not criminal.
Yeah, we kept saying we don't think this person committed a crime, but what they're doing was really harmful to the community and really harmful to members of our community, and we're not going to tolerate that behaviour. And it's not as simple as just saying, even if the police were great at doing their job, it's not as simple as just saying, I'll just let the police deal with it, because crimes quite rightly are reserved for generally for the serious stuff. There's a very wide range of behaviour that is not really acceptable, but maybe isn't criminal.
And
exactly.
even in the situations where you might be able to go to the police, you kind of do want to remove a person from the community before it gets to the level where the police can get involved.
There's that as well. I don't want to let someone escalate to stalking somebody in real life if I can head it off with, hey, they're being super creepy, here's what they've said. Okay, they're gone. Bye.
And the legal process is it's a drawn-out process. I mean, we could easily be talking a year, if not several years. We report someone to the police. It could be 3-4 years before they've gone through all the process of trial, appeals, and their convictions confirmed. And at that point, they've had years on the site of continuing to behave in whatever way they were behaving. And that's not something we should be accepting. We're not talking about kind of grand liberty ideals here. It's we're not talking about locking somebody up and taking away their liberty. We're talking about removing somebody from an online game that they play for fun. And they have plenty of other things that they can do. If we have strong evidence that somebody is doing something bad, it's the balance of the harms is very different to a criminal case in a court.
All right, have we got anything else?
I think that's it.
Well, I was done, but I just got a message. Hang on. Okay, so the moderator response. Does anybody have that pulled up?
I've got it up.
I can get it pulled up.
Was there actually a policy change that allows them to make exceptions to the on-site action? Because what I saw looked like quoting something saying admins can do whatever they want. They can always change the rule.
Yeah, so there wasn't a policy change. There was a highlighting of the fact that the terms of services reserve the admins the right to ban people whenever they want. Basically, they were kind of commenting on the fact that
because I've just got a message from someone saying that was supposed to have been a policy change.
What the exact quote from the statement is, that said, per the site rules stating Max and the admins may invoke special rulings as they see a need, site staff has the right to remove a user for any reason not already outlined in the terms of service, to frequently ask questions or the one-stop shop rules. Whether it's certainly, that wording does not say change in policy. That wording says this was already the policy. Maybe that was an error, and maybe they meant to say that was a change in policy, but that isn't what it says.
Okay, well, that.
And they also say that they don't really want to do that. So
yeah,
they specifically say we don't want to use this power.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't completely off base on that. All right, I think that's everything.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening, and thank you to Asta, Hem, and Malashaan for coming out and talking tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for being here.